My daughter asked me why I wasn't crying, and I realized I didn't know how to answer her. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and we'd just come back from the vet. Our dog, Biscuit, had been put down that morning. He was 14. I had had him since before she was born. I signed the paperwork, I paid the bill, I carried his leash and collar home in a small paper bag, and I felt functional. Steady. Like I was checking items off a list. My daughter, who was 11, cried the entire ride home. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on her back, saying the right things. It's okay to be sad. He had a good life. We gave him the best years. All true. All calm. All delivered in the same voice I'd used to explain a math problem. When we got inside, she looked at me with this confused, almost hurt expression and said, "Dad, why aren't you crying?" I told her I was sad on the inside. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me, and honestly, neither did I. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I didn't really want, replaying the question. Why aren't you crying? It wasn't an accusation. She was genuinely curious, the way kids are when they notice something doesn't add up. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had cried. Not at a funeral. Not during a hard year at work. Not during my own divorce, 3 years back, when I signed papers ending a 12-year marriage with the same steady hand I'd used at the vet's office that morning. I started thinking back further, trying to locate the moment I'd learned to be like this. And what I found wasn't a moment. It was an absence. Growing up, my house wasn't cruel. Nobody yelled, nobody hit anybody. But nobody talked about feelings either. If I fell off my bike and cried, my father would say, "You're fine, get up." Not unkindly. Just automatically, like a reflex passed down from someone else's father. If I was scared of something, my mother would redirect me. Don't think about that, think about something else. If I was angry, I was told I was being dramatic. Slowly, without anyone deciding it on purpose, I learned that feelings were something to manage quietly and privately, not something to express. I learned to answer, "I'm fine," so automatically that it stopped being a lie. It just became my default setting. I always thought of myself as calm. Level-headed. The guy people came to during a crisis because I didn't panic. I used to take pride in that. Sitting in my kitchen that night, I started to wonder if calm was even the right word for it. Maybe I wasn't calm. Maybe I just never learned the language. The next morning, I picked up my daughter from school, and on the drive home she brought Biscuit up again. She said she still felt sad, and then she asked me something that stuck with me harder than the first question. She asked, "Is it bad that I still feel sad 2 days later?" And I heard myself, without thinking, almost say the thing my father would have said. Something like, "You'll feel better soon, don't dwell on it." The words were right there, ready to go, like they'd been sitting loaded in my mouth my whole life. But I stopped myself. I actually pulled the car up to a red light and just sat with the question for a second before answering. I told her no. It wasn't bad at all. I told her that feeling sad for a long time about something that mattered wasn't a problem to fix, it was just what missing someone felt like. I told her I was actually still sad too, and that I probably hadn't shown it very well. She looked over at me, surprised. Not because it was some profound thing to say. It's a pretty ordinary thing to say, if you think about it. She was surprised because it was the first time I'd said something like that out loud instead of just steering her away from the feeling. That conversation opened something up that I didn't expect. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to myself in a way I never had before. Not in a self-pitying way, just noticing. I noticed that when a coworker asked how I was doing after the divorce, I'd say, "Doing great, actually," even in weeks where I absolutely was not doing great. I noticed that when something upset me, my body would register it first, a tightness in my chest, a kind of low static in my head, before my mind even caught up to naming what I was feeling. I noticed that I had spent probably 30 years mistaking the absence of visible emotion for emotional strength. I started asking myself a strange question throughout the day: what am I actually feeling right now? Not what should I be feeling, not what's the appropriate response here, just, what's actually happening inside me. It sounds simple. It wasn't. The first few times I tried it, I genuinely couldn't answer. I'd reach for the feeling and find static instead, like a radio tuned between stations. It took real effort to sit there long enough for something to come into focus. Frustration. Tiredness that wasn't physical. A low hum of loneliness I'd been walking around with for months without naming it. I brought this up with a friend of mine, someone I've known since college, over beers one night. I expected him to think I was overthinking it, which is usually what I assume when I bring up anything remotely emotional. Instead, he got quiet for a second and said he thought most of the men he knew, including himself, were probably in the same boat. Not broken, not incapable of feeling things, just never taught the actual mechanics of it. Like being handed a car with no manual and being expected to figure out the dashboard on your own while driving in traffic. That stuck with me. We're not taught to feel the way we're taught to read or do math. We're expected to just absorb it, and if the people raising us never learned it themselves, they can't exactly pass it down. It's not really anyone's fault, not in a blaming sense. It's more like a habit that quietly moves from one generation to the next because nobody stopped long enough to question it. What changed for me wasn't dramatic. I didn't start crying at movies or journaling every night. It was smaller than that. When my daughter is upset now, I don't redirect her. I sit with her in it for a minute before we talk about fixing anything. When I'm frustrated at work, I try to actually name it to myself instead of just pushing through until it turns into a headache. I still catch myself defaulting to "I'm fine" more than I'd like. Old patterns don't just disappear because you notice them. But I notice them now, and that's different from before. A few months after Biscuit died, my daughter and I were watching an old home video, one of those ones from when she was maybe 4, chasing him around the backyard. And I felt this pressure behind my eyes, this thickness in my throat, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I actually let it happen. It wasn't a big dramatic cry. Just a few tears, quiet, while she wasn't looking. But I let it happen instead of swallowing it down and calling myself fine. She glanced over right as it was passing and just said, "You okay, Dad?" And I said, "Yeah. I just miss him." No performance, no deflection. Just the plain truth, out loud, in real time. She smiled a little and went back to watching the video, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Which, I think, is exactly what it should have been all along. I think about that moment a lot now. How something so small, admitting I missed my dog in front of my kid, felt like more of a breakthrough than almost anything else I'd done in years. It makes me wonder how many of us are walking around fluent in every other skill life requires: work, responsibility, problem solving, but never actually taught the basic grammar of our own emotions. And I wonder what would change, in our relationships, our parenting, our own sense of peace, if we stopped assuming that was just how we're built and started asking whether it was simply how we were taught.